Hello everybody, it is the Fantasy Football Almanac, bringing you guys my top 10 wide receivers video. Before I get into the video, please go down, leave a like down below, leave a comment, let me know what you think of the list, let me know if there's anything you would personally change. What is your top 10 wide receivers? And lastly, subscribe so you guys can absolutely dominate your friends in this year's Fantasy Football Leagues, your friends, your co-workers, anyone pretty much. With that out of the way, let's hop right into the video with our first wide receiver. What's there to be said about Cooper Kupp that hasn't already been said? He's the wide receiver one by a fair margin for me. First, last year he finished with 1,947 yards, which is practically unheard of in this era, and 16 touchdowns. I mean, come on, that's just absolutely ridiculous volume. You're not getting from almost any older wide receiver. Finished with over 190 targets. I mean, that's just freaking ridiculous, quite frankly. And in the playoffs, he somehow got even better, posting 6 touchdowns and averaging 120 yards per game in the playoffs. That got him Super Bowl MVP, and it's the best wide receiver season we've ever seen. Adding on to that, Matt Stafford has been a phenomenal quarterback when it comes to wide receiver value and production. I mean, he's hyper-targeted pretty much every single wide receiver he's ever had, whether that be Calvin Johnson, whether that be Kenny Golladay, and dare I say it, Marvin Jones. I mean, come on, this guy has hyper-targeted pretty much everyone that he's been around. I mean, having 1,900 yards, again, is virtually impossible. I mean, nobody's ever repeated a performance like that. But he could finish with not 300 yards less, not 400 yards less, not 500, not 600, but 700 yards less, and still have been the wide receiver 6 in yards last season. I mean, that is just absolutely insane. He could have finished with 0 touchdowns. 0. Take away all his touchdowns last season, and he would have finished as the wide receiver 5. I mean, I think regression is happening. There's no way he's not regressing. I mean, it's impossible to regress from that standard. But even if he regresses and goes down to, let's say 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns, I mean, that's easily one of the best seasons you're getting from a wide receiver, and that's more than fine. I mean, he could put up 1,300 yards and still be an insane wide receiver. So I don't see any reason why Cooper Kupp shouldn't be one. I'm not mad if you put any of these other guys above him, whether it be Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, who I will get to in a bit. I mean, I think, not to spoil it, but I think you guys knew Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase were coming next. But I'll get into the reasons why I think Justin Jefferson is 2 in just a second. Now, the second of these Tier 1 guys, there's no surprise here. Like I just said before, it's Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson, on Underdog, his current ADP is 3.3, and on Sleeper, his current ADP is 6.2. So this guy's going really high, mid-first round in most drafts. You figure, in most drafts, you're probably not going to get him if you're targeting running backs in the first round for the most part. But some leagues, he does go a little bit later because people do love targeting their running backs. I mean, everyone loves their running backs. So I think it is possible you get Justin Jefferson at a value where he's going in drafts right now. Maybe not so much on Underdog because I still do prefer Cooper Kupp. But on Sleeper, I think it certainly is possible, especially in more casual leagues that will be hammering these running backs when they should be taking wide receivers in this range. So the reason why Justin Jefferson is my wide receiver 2, I mean, there's a couple. For one, in most other years, I mean, Justin Jefferson would have easily led the league in yards, putting up 1,600 yards, which was second in the league, which is no easy task. But the only reason he didn't finish first is because you have a guy like Cooper Kupp right ahead of him putting up 1,900 yards, just showing how big the gap is between first and second place, a 300-yard difference. But Justin Jefferson putting up 1,600 yards. I mean, most seasons, wide receivers, there is no wide receiver, maybe 1 or 2 wide receivers putting up numbers like that. I mean, I remember Michael Thomas's 1,700-yard season, and that was historic. That was absolutely historic. And Justin Jefferson putting up 1,600 yards in year 2. one of the most consistent wide receivers in the entire league. I mean, this is a guy who, over the first 2 years of his career, has averaged over 100 yards at home. Last season, he only dipped under 10 points in half PPR twice the entire season. Most of the time, this guy's getting you locking in 17 points, but can boom for 30. So he does have boom weeks, he can win you weeks, and he's never really going to lose you a week. Rarely are you going to be disappointed with Justin Jefferson's performances, unless, he drops 15 and you're unhappy with 15, you needed 17 to win. It is possible that you may be disappointed in Justin Jefferson. But other than that, Justin Jefferson will be one of the most consistent performers on your team. He's a rock to have in redraft leagues and casual leagues, but he also has a really high ceiling. This is a guy who legitimately can have 1,700 yards and 12 touchdowns next year, and I don't think anyone would really be surprised. He also has some of the cleanest route running I've ever seen. His routes are so crisp. I'm going to be saying this about a lot of guys in this range just because everyone here is so talented. But his route running is so clean. For a year now going into year 3 guy, his route running is absolutely impeccable. Might be one of the best route runners through the first 2 years that we've ever seen. But the reasons I don't have Justin Jefferson above Cooper Kupp, and I know it hurts me because I do want to have Justin Jefferson above Cooper Kupp. I just can't do it. And these are the reasons. For one, Stafford is just a better quarterback than Kirk Cousins. I know, Kirk Cousins criminally slept on throughout most of his career, and still is being drafted as a quarterback, 14, 15 right now, in underdog drafts. He's not a guy that people put a ton of stock into to be a quarterback one, but he has produced. The last year, 33-7, the year before that, 35-12, 35-15. He can produce, but Stafford can produce on a level that's just pretty much higher. 2 is target competition. I know Allen Robinson coming in does increase target competition, but other than that, you have Van Jefferson, who is pretty much a non-factor to steal volume from Cooper Kupp, whereas with Justin Jefferson, you do have Adam Thielen, who will not only be stealing volume, but touchdowns, valuable touchdowns, and that really is where it comes down to, for the fact that we also have KJ Osborne coming into this offense, who I think can at least steal some volume as a year 3. I don't think he'll be stealing much from Justin Jefferson, but it is possible that it lowers his overall ceiling. And then also Irv Smith and Dalvin Cook. So the run game is better in Minnesota. The passing game is just slightly worse, and there's more competition. I do think Dalvin Cook will steal a couple red zone touches, whether this be rushing or receiving wise. So it is possible that I think Cooper Kupp's ceiling is just a little bit higher. As we saw this past year, his ceiling is absolutely ridiculous. But that's why, personally, I have Justin Jefferson at 2 and Cooper Kupp at 1. But gripes like these, things like these, are really, really small. I have zero problem if you want to go Justin Jefferson 1. I think both of these guys are really talented. And the thing with Justin Jefferson is why, you could easily justify taking him as the number 1 wide receiver is because his ceiling, his next year is pointing up. His projection, his trajectory is pointing up, whereas Cooper Kupp's inevitably is trending down. No matter what, you're getting a worse version of Cooper Kupp than you saw last season. With Justin Jefferson, that's not the case. He could put up 1,700 yards, 12 touchdowns. He could finally start racking in these touchdowns that he has yet to really put up in insane levels throughout his career. But either way, that's why I do have Justin Jefferson at pick 2. I think it's, or at wide receiver 2. I do think he's fine if you want to take him at 1. I definitely still have him as a tier 1 wide receiver, but I would hesitate a tiny bit to take him over Kupp just because of the historic season Cooper Kupp had and how he can produce for your fantasy team over the next year. Obviously, if you're playing Dynasty, take Justin Jefferson and run, way over Cooper Kupp. I wouldn't even say there's an argument. Same thing with Jamar Chase, who I'm about to talk about in just a second. But in redraft leagues, I think the battle is pretty close. Can't really go wrong with either one. Yeah, so my wide receiver 3 this season is Jamar Chase. I think Jamar Chase is absolutely phenomenal and can absolutely take the top off a defense and win you a week. Currently, on Sleeper, he's going at an ADP of 9 as the wide receiver 3, and on Underdog at an ADP of 5.4, again as the wide receiver 3. He 100% has the ceiling to finish as the wide receiver 1. He's a guy who last year had 18 yards per catch. I mean, that is just absolutely insane. I mean, those are numbers you rarely ever see from a guy commanding 120 targets. He also had over 1,400 yards as a rookie, breaking Justin Jefferson's record from last year, and 13 touchdowns. He looks like an absolute machine out there. He's a huge playmaker. I mean, a guy, like I said before, can win you a week with this playmaking, and he's attached to the Super Bowl loser, but still Super Bowl player, Joe Burrow. This is a guy who slung 34 touchdowns last year in just his second season, coming off one of the most brutal leg injuries we ever saw his rookie year, coming back and leading this team to a Super Bowl, rallying together, and now the team's only going to get better. This year, he did finish with 120 targets and 81 total receptions, playing a full 17 games. T. Higgins actually, believe it or not, had a higher target share than Ja'Marr Chase this past season, something I don't think many of us will project to happen again. So in that case, I do believe that Ja'Marr Chase will see a bump up in his overall targets. I mean, I think 120 is too low for a talent of this caliber. I could see him putting up 140 or 150, but with that will most likely come a dip in efficiency. I mean, he was just so efficient last season. He looked ridiculous. I mean, he could take pretty much any ball to the house last season. And I do expect some of those plays again. I definitely think they will happen again. But defenses will adjust. Will probably be a little bit more cautious of Ja'Marr Chase. Try not to let him get those deep balls as much. I do think it's impossible to guard both T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase. You're going to have to pick your poison. I really think because of that, you really can't double either one of them. And whichever one you do decide to double, the other one's just going to feast. So it's really hard to double either of these guys. And it means Ja'Marr Chase isn't drawing doubles every single game, which is really, really nice for Ja'Marr Chase's overall fantasy stock. Chase really has two negatives that kind of go against him, but not really. One is the fact that last year he did have a few dud games. I mean, there was 4 games last season where he went under 10 points, and 1 game where he only caught 1 reception. So it is possible he can dud. It is possible that he has a bad week. At least as of last year, there were a few games where he had a bad week. And the second slight concern, and this lowers his floor a little bit, is having T. Higgins in the offense. I mean, T. Higgins, absolutely phenomenal wide receiver in his own right. I am really, really high on T. Higgins this season. But it will take away some overall volume from Ja'Marr Chase. And with that slight reduction in volume or slight dip in volume from these other top 2 guys, that's why I do have Ja'Marr Chase at 3. But I think although it does lower Ja'Marr Chase's floor just a tiny bit on a week-to-week basis, it also does in ways raise his ceiling. Because if you have T. Higgins and you decide, okay, we're going to eliminate T. Higgins from this game, Ja'Marr Chase is going to absolutely feast. Ja'Marr Chase will take 3 balls to the house. He'll run for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. And we've already seen his ceiling is pretty crazy. I mean, he put up 50 points in Week 17. If you have that type of production in the fantasy championship, you're winning your league almost no matter what. Unless your other league mate has Joe Burrow to almost kind of counteract it, you're pretty much winning your league with that. On the downside, he can potentially hurt you in the fantasy championship if he does have one of those dud games. This is why I do have Ja'Marr Chase at 3. I do expect him to finish with around 1,600 yards. And I think 11 touchdowns is about fair because he has proven he is a pretty big touchdown guy. I mean, with his frame and everything like that, he should be. But I think 11 touchdowns and 1,600 yards is about fair. One last positive I did want to discuss before moving on to the next player. The Bengals O-line has improved a ton. They picked up Lyle Collins from the Cowboys and 2 other pretty big-name players. to skyrocket them into the top 10 O-lines according to PFF. So that gives Joe Burrow more time to throw. He's not going to be sacked 50 times like he was last season, or 8 or 9 times. For anyone watching that Texans game or that Titans game, that was absolutely crazy. I mean, that was horrendous to watch for Joe Burrow. But now, I mean, it shouldn't be happening as much. It'll give more time for Ja'Marr Chase to develop on his routes. It'll pretty much help out the entire offense, and that's why I really am high on this whole offense this season. I do think it is possible, again, to take Ja'Marr Chase as the wide receiver 1 off the board if you are really high on him. I personally wouldn't, just because I don't think he can reach that 170, 180 targets that both Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson can. But as a wide receiver 1, he is absolutely potent and is set to destroy fantasy this year, if the cards end up right. Stefon Diggs this year in fantasy is about the safest pick you can possibly have early in the second round or first round, depending on where you're drafting him. Just to start it off, on Sleeper, he's going off the board, ADP of 14.3 as the wide receiver 5. I currently have him as the wide receiver 4. And on Underdog Fantasy, he's coming off the board at 7.9 as the wide receiver 4. So now let's jump into Stefon Diggs. Let's see what he's all about. So last year, you kind of disappointed a little bit for where you were drafting him. He had 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns, which is fine. I mean, that's not a bad season. Not a bad season by any stretch of the imagination. But it's not where you're drafting a guy in the second round. It's not where you expect him to finish. You want a guy like that to have 1,400 yards, potentially even more touchdowns. But a lot of this wasn't his fault. He got over 160 targets last year, but only 119 of them were deemed catchable. Catchable. That's crazy. He has about the same level of competition he has had last year with the departure of Emmanuel Sanders, but Gabe Davis is ascending, Isaiah McKenzie is ascending. So I think he will finish with a similar target volume that he had last year, somewhere around 160. From Josh Allen, too, no less. I mean, when you got one of the best quarterbacks in the entire league throwing to you, a guy who could easily sling 35 touchdowns and throw for 4,000 yards, I mean, it's hard not to like Stefon Diggs. He's operating one of the best offenses. His competition's okay. There really isn't anything wrong with Stefon Diggs. I mean, he will be as consistent as you get. So why don't I have him among these other top 3 wide receivers? I think the answer is a little tough because I do really want to have him there. I just can't do it. I think for one, he doesn't really have league-breaking upside. I mean, we saw last year about what he can do on average, I would think. 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. He should have had more like 12. Yeah, I 100% agree. But I don't think it's really possible to see Stefon Diggs hit 190 targets this year. Realistically, I mean, I guess it is if everything breaks right. But he doesn't have the ceiling to have that 190 targets. And he's not as good of a boom player as Ja'Marr Chase. So basically the reason why I can't put him in this tier is because he doesn't do anything better than the wide receivers above him do. He's not as explosive or will win you as many weeks as Ja'Marr Chase. But he also won't receive the target volume, most likely, of Cooper Kupp, and doesn't have the breakout potential. Not even really breakout at this point. We know what Justin Jefferson is. But that league-altering upside that Justin Jefferson possesses this year. I mean, that's just the way I look at things, and that's why I have Stefon Diggs a tier below these guys, because it doesn't really do anything better than any of these other guys. But I do see an argument where you could put Stefon Diggs in as a top three wide receiver, or in the same tier with these other top 3 guys. Me personally, I just can't do it because of the reasons I just said. But I do think he is an absolutely phenomenal wide receiver, and I think he's pretty much a virtual lock to at least repeat what he did last season. I mean, I think last season's probably around his floor. I've had to project it out. I would think around 1,400 touchdowns and 1,400 yards. and somewhere between 8 and 12 touchdowns, but it is possibly does finish with as many as like 13 or 14, especially being in this offense that he's in. He doesn't really have much competition at running back with James Cook there. So overall, I think Stefon Diggs is a really, really safe pick. You're never going to be mad, but it is possibly does have a bust week or two. It leaves you out to dry just a tiny bit when Josh Allen's looking a little off. But I think he's about the safest wide receiver in this range. I mean, there's nobody I would rather have past these top 3 guys. And it's really not close. I mean, Stefon Diggs, and then I would almost put another tier drop off. I'm not going to do that, just for the sake of the fact that these other guys below him are still really, really good, but do have some question marks coming into this season, whereas Stefon Diggs doesn't really have those question marks. That's why I have Stefon Diggs at 4, though. Now, moving on to number 5. For my next wide receiver, let's start it off just rattling off some facts about the guy before I actually get into what his name is and everything. Last year, he finished as the wide receiver 2. He's in one of the best offenses in the entire league. Quarterback picked 2nd in the draft. He's got a really phenomenal supporting cast. One of the best offensive coaches in the entire league. He's both a running back and a wide receiver, primarily being used as a wide receiver, but also has a higher floor with his running back position. Got over 120 targets last year despite playing some games at running back, and got 60 attempts. I'm sure you guys know who it is by now. I mean, the running back wide receiver combo definitely gave it away. The guy's Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, why is he going as low as he is? I mean, I understand there are certainly risks with the Deebo Samuel profile, but there are similar risks of guys below him. And he finished as the wide receiver 2 last season. Wide receiver 2. He has one of the best offensive coaches we've possibly ever seen. I mean, guy's an absolute offensive genius, for one. Second, he's in one of the best schemes that fits his play style to a T. I mean, a guy who plays primarily behind the line of scrimmage, but can explode for 40-yard touchdowns and absolutely win you weeks. He's got elite speed, elite athleticism. He's really, really talented. And he's the same age, believe it or not, the same age as Deontay Johnson. So age isn't a concern. His athleticism isn't a concern. The scheme isn't a concern. The quarterback situation is a concern, I will admit. But why is he going in the 2nd round if he was so talented and finished as the wide receiver 2 last year? The reason, I'd say it, regression. Regression. He will regress. He will 100% regress from what he did last year. It's basically impossible for him to not to. He had 120 targets and put up a phenomenal receiving performance with those 120 targets. And in the rushing game, he had 59 total rushes. 59 total rushes. And averaged over 6 yards per attempt. The 6 yards per attempt is completely unsustainable. I mean, it's possible he goes down to 5 or 4, but if he's maintaining similar rushing volume, he most likely will see a reduction in points in efficiency standpoint, but he also will see a reduction in points from his rushing touchdowns. He scored 8 rushing touchdowns last year on 59 attempts. That's a rushing touchdown 14% of the times he rushed. I mean, I just don't think it's possible for him to repeat that. But on the flip side, he only had 6 touchdowns on 120 targets. 6 touchdowns on 120 targets. Jamar Chase had the same amount of total targets and had 13 touchdowns. I understand Jamar Chase more explosive than Deebo, more athletic than Deebo, and a top 5 pick, whereas Deebo was not. But even still, I mean, I think it's fair to say Deebo's total touchdown volume goes from the 14 he had last year to about 10. I expect his yards to remain somewhat similar because he is so quarterback friendly. He gets schemed up so well with Shanahan. I do expect his yards to be similar. I expect his total targets to be similar. I expect him to still get work in rushing. So why is he going so low? I mean, he's going into a quarterback, yes. This is a guy who's going as the wide receiver 7 in the middle to the end of the second round in most drafts. He's even falling to the 3rd in Sleeper a lot of the time. His average ADP on Sleeper is 23.2, meaning he's a late 2nd, early 3rd round pick in most formats, where on Underdog he's 17.6. I do think he will regress this season. I mean, it's pretty much impossible for him not to. But the regression he's going to be facing isn't as bad as people make it out to be. In my humble opinion, I think he will still be a very dominant wide receiver who also has an increased floor from the run game. Trey Lance will vulture some touchdowns near the end zone, but you do figure with Trey Lance, they will be getting to the end zone just as much, if not more. Trey Lance, a 2nd overall pick in one of the best schemes in the entire league. I don't think he has the ceiling to finish as the wide receiver 1 this season, but he finished as the wide receiver 2 last season with 300 total fantasy points and half PPR. In any other season, most other seasons, he would have been the wide receiver 1 or very, very close to it. And I just don't think it's smart to fade a guy who has the ceiling to be a potential wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 just because he's due for a regression. I don't think it's smart to do that. It feels weird with me ranking Deebo this high. He's a guy I was very low on last year. But this year, I mean, I don't get why people are ranking him so low. I think he's an absolute steal where he's going. I prefer him over Ceedee Lamb. I prefer him over Davante Adams. And I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense as to why he is going this low. He will regress, but he won't regress as much as people are thinking. And that is really where you can make your money with Deebo Samuel. My number 6 wide receiver is Davante Adams. I know. I'm putting my hands up. Don't shoot me, please. I'm begging. Don't pull me. Don't shoot me. Anything. Joking aside, Davante Adams. But before I get any hate or anything, Davante Adams, one of the most consistent wide receivers in the entire league. The best route runner in the entire league. And in my opinion right now, the best wide receiver in the entire league. I think that will most likely change after this year. I think Justin Jefferson will ascend and become the best wide receiver in the league after next year. But Davante Adams right now is the best wide receiver in the entire league. So it hurts me to say Davante Adams is my wide receiver 6 this year in fantasy football. Currently, he's coming off the board as the wide receiver 4 on Sleeper, the wide receiver 5 on Underdog, with an ADP of 7.9, or 10.8, sorry, 10.8 on Underdog, and 11.1 on Sleeper, so right around the same range, right at that back end of the first type vibe. And I think it's totally acceptable to take him there, in terms of the fact that he's a very talented wide receiver. He's one of the safest wide receivers you'll ever have. But my problem with Davante Adams is that this year, there are a fair amount of question marks. I don't think I need to speak about all the positives that Davante Adams brings. Everybody knows him. He's absolutely insane. I guess I will gloss over. I guess I will talk about Davante Adams. I will talk a little bit about Davante Adams' pros. For one, since 2016, he's only had one season with less than 10 touchdowns. He's an absolute touchdown machine. And when he plays, this guy can consistently average over 100 yards a game. I mean, there's few receivers with the talent level of Davante Adams in the NFL right now, if any. I think he's the most talented wide receiver in the entire league. But there are some question marks coming in for Davante Adams. For one, he's switching teams. I mean, whenever a wide receiver switches teams, they usually perform worse in their first year when they come to a new team. Davante Adams is a very talented wide receiver. Don't get me wrong. Going to a new team is always a little bit scary, especially when you're going from a top 5 quarterback of all time to Derek Carr. I know Davante Adams said he's going from one Hall of Famer to another. We all know that's not true. Derek Carr is not a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's a good quarterback. He threw for 4,800 yards last year, which is really, really good. Really good. And I don't want to knock Derek Carr because I do think he has been hindered, at least slightly, with the lack of weapons he's been given over the course of his career. But this is a guy who has never thrown 30 touchdowns once in his career. Never once has he thrown 30 touchdowns. Davante Adams is going from a guy that consistently throws between 35 and 45 touchdowns, coming away from a guy who just won back-to-back MVPs, to a guy who's good. He's a good quarterback. A guy who most likely will have over 4,000 yards. Over 4,500 yards. And should sling in the range of 25 to 35 touchdowns. But that is not Aaron Rodgers level production in the touchdown game. It's just not. So that's my first gripe. My second gripe with Davante Adams this year. This is the most competition Davante Adams has faced his entire career. And there's no disputing that. He's going from Al Lazard, an undrafted player, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who has never been able to show anything aside from short bursts. And don't get me wrong, I love Al Lazard this year. But these players are not players that you're really worried about commanding serious volume. Davante Adams, because of that, had over 30% target shares every single season in Green Bay. For the past 3 seasons, he's had over a 30% target share. It's not hard to see why. He was Aaron Rodgers' favorite target by far. Him and Aaron Rodgers were totally on the same page. Now, he's coming in. He's got Darren Waller. He's got Hunter Renfrow. Both behind him in the depth chart. These are both guys who legitimately can command over 100 targets in this offense. And I don't think Davante Adams is going to be the one ceding a lot of his volume. You naturally have to expect that as competition goes up, his volume goes down. And I can't really say that his efficiency is going to go up. Going to a new quarterback, they did play in college. They do have some level of chemistry. But going to a quarterback that you haven't played with in years, and having the highest competition of your career. And then, of course, that quarterback is not as talented as Aaron Rodgers. So these things all together, along with the fact that Davante Adams is now 30 years old. 3-0. I don't think the fall-off is completely imminent. I don't think it's over for Davante Adams. I still have him as my wide receiver 6. But I think this is the start of where you can start to see some decline due to age. Most wide receivers do not last till they're 33. Usually 31, 32 is around when you hit the age cliff. We've seen that with most receivers, like a Julio Jones, Antonio Brown in terms of talent, not as much in terms of loco, most certainly. These are guys you have to start worrying about the age just a tiny bit. I think Davante Adams still will be fabulous this season, but with all these question marks, with the increased competition, the worst quarterback, the age, I just can't rank him in my top 5 this year. I think the situation is too, not bad, not poor, but a little bit concerning. And that's why I have him just outside my top 5. At pick 6, I'm not necessarily fading Davante Adams, but I do think he's a little overvalued at this point, and I am a little bit concerned with his overall production for next season. But that is my number 6 wide receiver. Now let's move on to number 7. The Ceedee Lamb situation is really pretty interesting. I think on one hand, he's one of these guys who should finish as the wide receiver 1. He should be one of the best wide receivers in the entire league. And on Sleeper and Underdog, he's being drafted just like that. On Sleeper, his ADP is 16, coming off as the wide receiver 6. And his Underdog ADP is 13.4, where he's coming off as the wide receiver 6 yet again. So people have real confidence in Ceedee Lamb to finish as a top 6 wide receiver. And on the surface, everything looks really, really good for Ceedee Lamb. It almost looks like a little too good for Ceedee Lamb. First and foremost, the situation. He's got pretty much zero competition for targets. I mean, he lost Amari Cooper, a guy who was consistently an 1,000-yard or more producer in the NFL. He also is not competing with Gallup for the first few weeks of the season. We don't know exactly how long that injury is, but for at least the first few weeks of the season, he will not be competing with Michael Gallup, meaning he is only competing with Jalen Tolbert, a rookie wide receiver drafted in the 3rd round. And whoever their wide receiver 3 is, which, I mean, it really is up for grabs at this point. It could be Tony Pollard, a running back. Zeke figures to get some receptions in this mix. Dalton Schultz as well. But, I mean, are any of these guys legitimate threats to steal serious volume from somebody who could be a true wide receiver 1? I mean, Ceedee Lamb's the type of guy who could legitimately be a true wide receiver 1. He was drafted 17th overall. He's had 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns last season, and 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns the season before. So he does have a fairly stable base of production to go along with him. There's really almost no true thing stopping Ceedee Lamb from becoming that wide receiver 1 and ascending to becoming a top 4 guy. The only concern I have, I guess there's two. The two concerns that I have with Ceedee Lamb are, for one, Dak Prescott has never hyper-targeted a wide receiver. He's not that Stafford type of quarterback where he wants to sling it to his guy 170, 180 times. He has never targeted a wide receiver more than 150 times ever in his career. And you can argue that he's never had a wide receiver with the caliber of Ceedee Lamb. But at the same time, a stat like that is somewhat concerning for Ceedee Lamb's overall ceiling this year. I mean, it really just is. It's pretty concerning. And the second thing is, he finished with 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns last year, and 6 touchdowns the year before that. That's good, but that's not a guy I'm drafting as a top wide receiver to be my wide receiver 1. Yes, some of that comes down to the competition he has on the roster. He had a lot of competition on the roster. But if you're going to only put up 6 touchdowns, that red zone presence is a little scary. I'm a little concerned with the overall ceiling that Ceedee Lamb brings. He could absolutely prove me wrong here. I mean, this is a guy who could easily prove me wrong. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 6 for a reason. This is somebody who could definitely finish as a top 3 wide receiver this season. I'm just a little concerned with the overall volume he's going to be getting with the way Dak plays. And the production thus far hasn't been superstar level. Granted, he's only had 2 years in the NFL. But I am a little concerned with his current draft price and the amount of production we've seen. I do project him to finish with around 1,300 or 1,400 receiving yards. He still is my wide receiver 7, but this does mean I'm kind of fading him just a tiny bit at his current ADP. I would be a tiny bit hesitant to invest into Ceedee Lamb, but he should figure to return at least good value where he's going. He does also have the upside to be the wide receiver 1. He's one of these last guys who I think can. And I think he does have a case to be made to slide him over Davante Adams. My 8th wide receiver for this season is Mike Evans. I think Mike Evans, one of the most consistent wide receivers in the entire NFL. I mean, he's had, through the first 8 seasons of his career, 8 1,000 or better yard seasons. I mean, it's the only wide receiver in history who's been able to achieve that feat. 8 seasons, 8 1,000 yard seasons. Mike Evans is absolutely insane. So that's why I have him here at my wide receiver 8. he's got a lot to like this year. For one, he's receiving passes from the greatest football player of all time, and there's no debate. He has more Super Bowls than any franchise in history. So he's playing with Tom Brady, for one. Two, his competition, really, really not all that strong. I mean, Chris Godwin, coming off a torn ACL, 7 months out of a torn ACL. Chris Godwin, very talented wide receiver. But who knows if he's coming back 100% from this torn ACL. It is possible he does take a couple months to really fully come back, like November, December type of time frame. And if that is the case, Mike Evans will be competing against Russell Gage, a guy who has never had over 800 yards in a season in his entire career. And I do think Russell Gage is slept on, but he's not a legitimate wide receiver 2 that poses a huge volume threat to Mike Evans. And then Julio Jones, and I know on the surface that may sound a little bit scary, but Julio Jones is 33 years old. I think Julio Jones will have a good season with Tom Brady, but I think it is hard to project Julio Jones to have like 1,000 yards this season or anything really serious. Russell Gage and Julio Jones combined, let's say they take up that wide receiver 2 slot, that kind of thing. But I don't think it's legitimate enough to take away serious volume from Mike Evans this season. And also, Gronkowski, I mean, where is he? He's on a beach. He's relaxing. He's retired. Gronkowski's one of Brady's favorite targets. He's gone now. The only person left is Cameron Brate at tight end and Kyle Rudolph, K. Dotton. These guys, you're not really too worried about taking targets. So Mike Evans is going to have the targets. 2, he's going to have the touchdowns. This is a guy who consistently is above average in touchdowns every single year. He's a 6'5" receiver, big body, can go up and get it. Kind of like that Gronk receiver for Tom Brady during the Tampa Bay Buccaneers era. He's absolutely insane in the end zone. It's hard to really find any faults to Mike Evans' game. He is 28-29 now, so maybe you do expect to see a little bit of regression. But I mean, he should finish with at least 1,100 yards and close to the range of 12 touchdowns. If he does, I mean, that's an absolutely phenomenal pick. He's one of the safest guys you could take, but can also give you a 40-point week when you need it. He's absolutely insane wide receiver. Also a guy, I mean, he has had only like 110, 120 targets in the Brady era, but now he has the least competition of his entire career to face. You do expect that number to go up a little bit. I mean, I think 135 to 150 is about fair to expect from Mike Evans this season. And if that does happen, I mean, that's at least 1,100 yards. Again, at least 12 touchdowns, maybe even potentially more. Leonard Fournette will vulture away some receptions, but I don't really think it'll be too big of a concern. I mean, even if Leonard Fournette has 100 targets, I don't think it's a concern whatsoever. Well, I don't think Mike Evans has the ability to finish as the wide receiver 1. I think he definitely has the ability to finish as one of the best receivers. I think he has a really good chance to finish around where he's going right now in Underdog and Sleeper, and that's the wide receiver 8. But I think he does also have upside to finish as a top 5 guy. And his floor is really, really high, too. I mean, if you're shooting for a guy with 1 high upside and 2 a high floor, this could be a career year for Mike Evans. And you're getting him as the wide receiver 8. And you could potentially have him as a wide receiver 2. You could double him up. You could get him and Jamar Chase in drafts, and you have 2 of the best wide receivers in the entire league. You can maybe even get him with Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson. You could have him as your wide receiver 2. That's what I really love about Mike Evans here. I think he's a phenomenal wide receiver. Don't mind taking him at all here. I think he is the last guy in this tier, and after this, there is kind of a tier drop off here. So let's talk about wide receivers 9 and 10 here. Next up, I know this name might be a little bit surprising, but at number 9, I got T. Higgins. I love T. Higgins this year. On Underdog, he's coming off the board at 26.1. That's the wide receiver 10. On Sleeper, he's coming off at 33.4, which is the wide receiver 11. He's coming off the board behind Keenan Allen here. Not a knock on Keenan Allen, but he's coming off the board as the wide receiver 11. Let's get into why I like T. Higgins so much. For one, T. Higgins is a beast. He's an absolute monster. Just watch him play. I mean, he is the perfect complement to Jamar Chase. He looks absolutely insane out there. And he had 1,100 yards last year in 14 games. 14 games. If he had played the full 17 games, which obviously there's no way we can know exactly what he's going to do, but if he had been on pace to play full 17 games, he would have finished with 1,350 yards. 1,350 yards places him as the 6th highest wide receiver in terms of yards last season, behind only Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Davante Adams, Jamar Chase, and Deebo Samuel. These are guys I have 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 on my list for this year. He would have finished behind only those guys. So the talent is obviously there. He's insanely athletic. What else does he have? For one, he's attached to Joe Burrow. Guy just led a team that nobody expected to go to the Super Bowl. He slung 34 touchdowns, and that number could honestly go up. Their O-line has gotten much better. They've proven that their passing game and passing effectiveness works. It is possible Joe Burrow can sling 35, even 40 touchdowns this season, and if that happens, the sky's the limit for T. Higgins. Also, T. Higgins actually had a higher target share per game than Jamar Chase last season. I don't expect that to continue. I don't think that's going to happen again. Jamar Chase is too talented for that to happen again. Not a knock on Higgins at all. But I do think a majority of that volume probably will be coming from Tyler Boyd and the loss of Uzama. I mean, Hayden Hurst is here now. I do think Hayden Hurst is value where he's going in drafts. But the fact still remains. They got a new tight end, Tyler Boyd, stepping into yet another season where T. Higgins is ascending, where Jamar Chase is ascending. So I think T. Higgins is a real legitimate value where he's going. The knocks on T. Higgins, they are fair knocks. One is that his floor is lower with Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase obviously being the wide receiver 1, he will most likely be receiving more targets this season, and there are games where Jamar Chase is going to be targeted a ton, which will leave T. Higgins out to dry, so to speak. But also that does raise T. Higgins' overall ceiling, in my opinion, on a week-to-week basis, but it does lower his floor on a week-to-week basis. From a ceiling perspective, I think his ceiling will be higher because he can have those 40-point boom weeks. If they just choose, okay, let's lock up Chase here. We're going to leave T. Higgins open. We'll leave him one-on-one. Chase, we got to double him. They double up Chase, T. Higgins is going to be wide open. He could have 40-point games because of that. The other weakness I see with T. Higgins, he only had 6 touchdowns last year. I do expect that number to go up, considering he is 6'4". He is a big body presence and should have more of a presence in the end zone, as they probably will pass more near the end zone. But it is a slight cause for concern. I mean, I do project him to have 8 or 9 touchdowns this year, but he could have as much as 12 or 13 if things break right for him, if he gets lucky in the end zone department. And if that happens, we're talking about a guy who's having over 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns. That's a wide receiver 1 to me. That is definitely a wide receiver 1 to me. We are drafting him like a wide receiver 1 here, but he is a low wide receiver 1. And then one last thing I love about T. Higgins that nobody is talking about. What if Jamar Chase goes down? If Jamar Chase goes down, T. Higgins is the wide receiver 1 in one of the best passing offenses in the entire league. T. Higgins could legitimately command over a 30% target share in this offense. If that happens, he could actually average like 1,600 yards. I don't think that high. I mean, that high is a little bit crazy, but 1,400, 1,500 is definitely well within the realm of possibility. And nobody's talking about it. I mean, if Jamar Chase goes down, I'm not saying it's likely, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's football. Anything's possible. T. Higgins has a pretty good ceiling. He's very stable. His floor might be a little low from week to week, but that's really his only weakness. Sometimes you're going to be watching games, you're going to be mad Jamar Chase is getting the ball. But other weeks, T. Higgins will win it for you with his play. That's why I really like T. Higgins here. I think he is a really good wide receiver choice here as my wide receiver 9. I wouldn't have it any other way, but I do have one last wide receiver in the same tier as him that I don't feel as confident in, to be 100% honest. And that is my wide receiver 10. I think this guy is really talented, can absolutely take the top off of defense. Of course, I'm talking about Tyreek Hill. Right now, going on underdog at 22.8 and sleeper at 20.3. Tyreek Hill, absolutely insane from year to year. I mean, he's a guy who can absolutely take the top off of defense and just win you a week in fantasy. I mean, how many times, for all the Tyreek Hill owners out there, have you been down 20, down 30, and Tyreek Hill absolutely took the week back for you with an 80-yard touchdown bomb? I mean, it's absolutely crazy watching Tyreek Hill play. He's one of the fastest players in the entire NFL. Really, really talented. The problem is, he's going for Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the entire league right now, or at worst, a top 3 quarterback in the league. To Tua, a guy who, I mean, at best right now, I'd consider him league average. Sure, he can break out, but he hasn't yet. He hasn't yet, and that is the problem. He hasn't broken out yet. This year should be the year, but we don't know. We don't know, and that's the problem with Tyreek Hill. He is paired up right now also with Jalen Waddle. I don't think this is as much of a problem as people are making it out to be. I still think there is a good amount of volume to go around, considering the only other targets in this offense are Gesicki and Cedric Wilson. I guess Chase Edmonds as well out of the backfield. But, I mean, I do think Tyreek Hill is going to get his, obviously. Jalen Waddle is going to get his. I think the volume overall will go down for both of these players a little bit, but I think it is overstated. Both of these players should be getting 130 to 150 targets. Whichever one gets more, I mean, fine, whatever. Throw your hands up. But both of these players will be getting tons and tons of targets. My worry is that the efficiencies will most likely go down for Tyreek Hill. I mean, going from Pat Mahomes again to Tua, I mean, the efficiency inevitably has to go down. And his volume may take a slight dip. So, 1, he's getting worse volume, and 2, it's going to be less efficient, and 3, it's going to be an offense that's probably producing less touchdowns. That's my worry for Tyreek Hill. If he were still on the Chiefs, I mean, he would be 4 on this list, no questions. I mean, he would easily be in a tier of his own with Stephon Diggs as the wide receiver 4. Same thing with Davante Adams. Davante Adams was still in the Packers. I would have him at 2, maybe 3. But the unfortunate news is that they are not on their same teams. And it does take a year for these wide receivers to adjust. They do love Tyreek Hill. I mean, obviously everyone loves Tyreek Hill. In terms of talent, he's absolutely insane. But I do worry. I think the competition is still pretty bad. I mean, he's not competing with targets for Travis Kelce anymore, but Jalen Waddle still is a very similar player in terms of the amount of targets he's going to be getting. He's going to be in an offense that throw the ball less, and the throwing itself is going to be less efficient. Does scare me a little bit with Tyreek Hill. Still think he will win you weeks. Still think his upside is pretty insane. But I do expect a little bit of a lower floor from Tyreek this year. And that reason, I'm not really fading him, but I am a tiny bit worried with where he's going. I think he's in the same tier as T. Higgins, but I would personally prefer T. Higgins because I think T. Higgins does have a higher upside and is in a better offense. And also the thing with Tyreek Hill is it's not 100% clear if he's going to be the wide receiver 1 this year in the offense. I do think he will be. I think Tyreek Hill will most likely be the wide receiver 1, but there is a possibility that Jalen Waddle finishes higher than Tyreek Hill. And you can get Jalen Waddle a couple rounds later. So that's why I think Jalen Waddle is probably the better value, the guy I want more in this offense, just because you can get him later. I do think Tyreek Hill's still a great player. I mean, I do have him in my top 10 for a reason. And after this, I think there is kind of a teardrop off. But I don't think Tyreek Hill has the access to the same upside that he's had in years past. And that's why I am a tiny bit lower on him. But anyways, guys, that is it for this video. My top 10 wide receivers. Please let me know down below what you guys think in the comments. Let me know your top 10 receivers. I want to hear your rankings of these guys. It can be in any order you want. I mean, you could also, if you really like DJ Moore, if you really like Keenan Allen, feel free to throw him in the top 10. Subscribe to the channel if you absolutely want to crush your league mates and hear some really, really interesting football facts. And like this video as well. It does mean a lot for the sport. Thank you, as always, yet again. This has been the Fantasy Football Almanac, and I hope you guys all have a good day, a good night, and a good life.